teacher who was walking around the classroom while the children were drawing pictures. And she stopped by one little girl's desk who was working very diligently. And she said, "Oh, what is it that you're drawing?" And the little girl, drawing. She said, "Oh, I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher paused for a moment, and then she said, "But no one knows what God looks like." The little girl didn't even look up. She said, "Well, they will in a minute." I love that. You know, she just has this absolute confidence. She's not troubled by doubts. She doesn't question the validity of her perceptions or fantasies. She understands what she understands. She knows what she knows. God, I remember being 7 years old, and I just thought I knew it all, right? Well, so much for that. Chances are this young person's concept of God will change as she grows up. Once she's an adult, she may move toward a more mature, more nuanced understanding of the sacred. Depending on her environment and the ideas she's exposed to, she may, as an adult, be part of a religious community that helps her explore her questions about God, about life and death, and about how best to live one's life. For many members of traditional religions, there's a kind of comfort in a system in which they can find all the answers. This is one way of approaching the big questions of life and the search for guidance on how to live. Questions such as, is there a God? If so, what is the nature of God? Does life have meaning? How did time begin? What is goodness? How do I know what is truly just? What happens after death? Who doesn't sometimes long for the firm grasp of someone else's arms, to be protected, to be cared for, to be encircled, to sleep secure, as we heard from Anthony a moment ago in the writing of Elizabeth Tarbox? An orthodox belief system can provide security. It can provide answers. It can eliminate doubt, and a system like this can be very comforting and uplifting for some people, especially if they're surrounded by like-minded people in a religious setting. For Christians, those orthodox answers would be framed by Jesus Christ. For Jews, the law of the covenant, and for Buddhists, the eightfold path to enlightenment, to name 3 traditions. There are 2 types of what we might call closed religious systems. The first is a system that's bound by a creed, a statement of faith that's created by religious authorities. A creed is a summary of the religion's sacred texts and their interpretation by those authorities, a sort of shorthand. The scriptural, non-creedal, is the other type of closed system. It's a typical stance of fundamentalist and evangelical Christians. The Amish, the Mennonites, and the Baptists. Baptists are also Christian, Bible-based, and non-creedal. Again, it can be very comforting to know that there, inside this one book, are all the answers. I'm reminded of a classmate named Bill. He was in a seminary course I took on the Gospel Book of John in the Christian Bible. I don't know what his denomination was, but Bill's religious outlook was one in which the Bible was the only source of authority. No creed but the Bible. I learned very on that he and I were on the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as biblical interpretation was concerned. Each week we wrote a reflection paper on the previous week's assignment, and then we'd trade papers with an assigned partner and comment on what our partner had written. I'm quite sure that our professor couldn't resist putting Bill and me together because he was well aware of the differences between Bill's and my outlooks. At the time, I was a little annoyed, but I later really appreciated what the professor did because I gained some insight into a very different paradigm of religious faith. We were learning to interpret the gospel writings metaphorically, but Bill's understanding of these writings was absolutely literal. Whatever Jesus says in the Bible is word for word accurate. Bill's was a faith that was very clear and certain. He had a hard time in that class. The lack of a creed is a position that bothers many mainstream Christians. Their creeds help preserve the Orthodox faith. By providing formal public affirmation of their faith, churches enable their members and prospective members to know exactly where they stand. Creed provides clarity. It makes sure there aren't murky waters where people can get lost in wrong beliefs. A no creed but the Bible stance opens up the possibilities for all kinds of interpretations of Scripture, what some have called novel deviations from historic Christendom. Or worse, forming the bases for cults. And usually there's one dominant leader that decides how things are going to be interpreted. Now, Unitarian Universalism has never been a creedal faith. Both our Unitarian and our Universalist forebears rejected the idea that religious authorities have the right to impose their views on the laity. This is the source of our commitment to freedom of belief. But we are not a cult. At least we don't think so. But here's why. As former UUA President William Schultz has written in the Unitarian Universalist Pocket Guide, our individual predilections need to be tempered by conversation with our tradition and tested within the crucible of our community. It's through this tempering and testing process that Unitarian Universalism continues to be what we call a living faith, one that isn't static. We're different from other religious organizations. As William Schultz has written, we respect the answers offered by Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and the other world faith traditions, and even draw upon some of those traditions, but we respect the mystery more. I like that phrase. We know that the answers to the great religious questions may change from generation to generation, and that ultimate truths about the universe and its creations can never be captured in a statement of faith. Rather than being a creedal religion, Unitarian Universalism is covenantal, going back almost 400 years ago to the original Cambridge platform, and that was formed before the Unitarians split off from the Congregationalists up in the Boston area. That basic covenant was to walk together in fellowship. They said Christian fellowship, but to walk together in fellowship. A covenant leaves room for new understandings and change. As UU Minister Lisa Ward has written, a covenant says, I will abide with you in this common endeavor and be present as best I can in our becoming. She goes on, a creed gives authority to a statement. A covenant gives authority to a shared vision. A creed creates an us and them, blue hats, red hats, whereas a covenant invites relationship. And our covenant includes a commitment to stay connected to both our Universalist and our Unitarian histories, the Universalist legacy of love at the center of our faith, and the Unitarian conviction that human beings have the capacity to shape our future responsibly. As Unitarian Universalists, as people who have chosen freedom of belief over a fixed doctrine, we have made a number of trade-offs. We've given up the comfort of knowing the answers. We've given up the sense of security that living in a known universe can provide. We've given up believing that we know the whole story, that revelation of the truth is sealed. The sacrifice of our covenantal faith is that we let go of assumptions, of dogma, and of control, and instead trust that greater wisdom will be revealed over time in bits and pieces as we grow and become together. We who have chosen a free faith have chosen to live with some measure of ambiguity. We've traded certainty for possibility. It's human nature to want to have answers and explanations. Yet we need to have a certain amount of tolerance for ambiguity, openness to more than one interpretation. We need to be able to stay in the uncertainty, to stay with the questions, despite not having the answers or sometimes not even knowing where we're headed. Sometimes we have to be willing to stay in the fog, to make room for new connections, which may eventually crystallize into a clear direction or a clear understanding. It's in this fertile place of unknowing where our creativity can really flourish. Those of us who choose a free faith trade security for vulnerability, like little shells stuck inside a bigger shell. We know that as long as we stay as we are, we will not grow. We have to take risks. We have to make ourselves vulnerable in order to be open to new revelations, new understandings, new insights. Today, as we wrestle more and more with human diversity and the desire for world community, we're sometimes challenged in uncomfortable ways to open ourselves up. All this takes courage. But it can help to remind ourselves, I think, that it's by being open and engaging with diverse backgrounds and experiences and ways of thinking and being that we enrich our spiritual journeys. It's in this way that we ultimately find the essential unity which lies beyond our diversity. As Unitarian Universalists, we've traded untested faith for one which embraces and encourages the exploration of our doubts. The Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg explains how doubt is essential to deepening our faith, whatever our religious tradition. She says, we have to be able to try things out, to wonder. Faith is strengthened when doubt is a sincere questioning, combined with trust in our own right and ability to discern the truth. And as Unitarian Universalists, we know that truth is never absolute. We need to be able to say, oh, I thought I was right, but maybe there are other ways of looking at it. Holding opinions lightly, something I'm learning to do more and more as I get older. When we relax our grip on our opinions and tightly held convictions, we can then open ourselves up to listen to what the universe has to teach us. And it's through our creative exchanges, whether it's with another person or in looking deeply into whatever it is before us, that we may be led to new insights and spiritual wisdom. Some members of Orthodox faiths find ways to face and work through their doubts, with the result being a stronger commitment to that faith. Of course, there are risks in doing that. Closer examination could have the opposite effect. Others find ways to set aside their doubts and turn their attention and focus toward their faith commitment without wading into that fraught territory. I think perhaps my former classmate was one of those people. Those who choose a free faith, as we have, trade the protective comfort of turning away from conflicting ideas for the challenge of holding paradox in tension. For example, we may recognize that humans have free will and believe that everything happens the way it's meant to. We may believe that everything is in perfect order, that all is ultimately good, and yet there's so much pain and suffering in the world. As Unitarian Universalists, we've given up the comfort and security of knowing all the answers. We have embraced a free faith. With freedom comes responsibility. Responsibility to find meaning and purpose, to ponder the big questions for ourselves, with each other. The responsibility to live an ethical life and to contribute to addressing societal and environmental injustices. And the responsibility to one another to support each other on our spiritual paths. We have rejected one kind of comfort and security. Instead, we find warmth, comfort, caring, and security here, not in doctrines, but in this community of faith. And we're held together in covenantal relationship by our history, and by our commitment to the values embodied in our principles. Remembering all the religious forebears who paved the way for us with their dedication, their tears, and some sacrificing their very lives, let us celebrate the free religious faith of Unitarian Universalism. May it be so.